Yeah, and John had made numerous complaints to the FAA as well, some of which they substantiated.
Yeah,
Um,
and the 90 days is especially crazy when you think about the amount of courage it takes to actually speak up, or even to, sometimes when you're in that environment and groupthink can be prevalent in a lot of workplaces like this. And John Barnett, I mean, you knew him well, but it seems that he was bolder than 99% of people, but it still takes time to get outside of that group mentality, or if you've been working somewhere for decades um, to get the courage. And there are so many life circumstances, as you said, if people are dependent on that salary, or they are dependent on the healthcare that's affiliated with the job, and it takes time for them to actually make that decision, and also takes time for them to deprogram from the group mentality that they've probably, maybe they're even gaslighting themselves into thinking maybe it's not a big deal. Maybe I am crazy. Um, maybe what I'm seeing isn't a problem because no one else is seeing it as a problem. But then you take time and you see it, uh, and you see, I feel like you just need time to process it. And 90 days is not enough.
no, and then of course the company, a lot of companies have what do you call it? Like an internal appeal process,
Right.
right? So they could lay you off, and then you can go through this appeal process, and of course that can last more than 90 days.
Yeah.
So they can play games, I think, with folks too, to stall it out, so they intentionally miss the statute of
Yeah.
limitations. Um, and in that case, you can only recover your lost wages and emotional distress you may have incurred.
Hmm.
Um, so it's kind of limited.
Right. Right. Are
And
you
it's,
seeing that with everything that's been happening the last few weeks with various crashes, the DC plane crash? Um, there was a crash yesterday that you flagged for me in Scottsdale where one person died. Do you think that more whistleblowers will come out of the woodwork as a result? Or do you think that they'll be scared because of this new administration? Or what are you seeing? Have you been seeing more of an influx of people coming to you specifically as it relates to aviation?
yeah, I hear from folks usually at least once a week in
Yeah.
aviation. Uh, it's
And is
a
that more, has that been the case for the last few years, or is it in the last month have you been hearing from more people?
it was really since March of last year after what tragically happened with John.
Yeah.
Um, I think it inspired a lot of folks that wanted to come forward and offer support for John. They saw that he had been on a mission to help protect safety and quality, and I think a lot of people want to do the right thing, but sometimes they're afraid, like you say, to speak up because they're caring for folks and have to make a living. And the aviation industry, again, is a pretty tight knit community here.
Hmm.
And a lot of people get scared; they'll get blacklisted or blackballed from the industry, which I've had folks that have claimed that. Um,
Right.
I think it was a tragic situation with the DC crash recently. Um,
Hmm.
it looks like that the helicopter may have been flying 100 feet out of its zone too high. And then I've read also that there was only like one air traffic controller working.
Yeah,
And
I was going to ask you if you've ever had air traffic controllers come to you, if you've ever had a case focused on that group of people specifically.
I have not yet.
Not yet, yeah.
It seems though that um, I didn't realize this until the media was talking about it, that Reagan National was the busiest airport in the country. Had you heard
Hmm.
that?
No, I didn't. I thought that for some reason I thought the Denver airport was, but I could
I
see
don't know.
Reagan.
Yeah, that's what a lot of folks, or I was reading that. Um, you would, I mean, I'm not an air traffic controller, but one would think you would need more than one person
Hmm.
conducting their
Yeah, and
job.
then of course Trump blamed it on DEI.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to comment on that, but I,
That's
I,
fair.
I mean, I think that there's clear liability on the government's part in this crash,
Hmm.
and we'll just have to wait and see. I'm sure there will be some cases being filed
Hmm.
against both the government and the airline.
Do you think that there's been, so I know you started doing whistleblower work in 2012, and people are accustomed to and familiar with the idea that planes are some of the safest forms of transportation up until recently, up until, John Barnett passed and Joshua Dean passed, and a lot of it, and then there was the video of the Boeing plane with the gigantic hole in the side, and now people are paying attention. But do you think that it's the number of incidents, the number of whistleblowers have grown um, in since pre 2012 when you started doing this work? And I'm sure that could be attributed to a lot of things, like new laws that made it easier for people to come forward, even though, as you just said, it's not that easy, or media attention on the matter, and that could influence how many people are coming forward. But yeah, I'm just wondering if you have the knowledge of the history of all of this. Is it getting worse? Because that's what the internet is saying, and that's what a lot of your whistleblowers are saying in certain ways. Yeah, I'm curious what your thoughts are on that.
Well, there certainly seems to be a lot more incidents. The FAA tracks all these, and you can go on their website and take a look. And I don't know. I've read thousands of complaints related to 787 issues, which is the plane that John was working on there in Charleston. That wasn't the only plane he had worked on. He had worked on a bunch of different systems out in Washington. But I don't know what to attribute it to. I mean, some of these, a few months ago, a plane crashed in Brazil.
Mm-hmm.
It just fell out of the sky.
Right.
And then you had the Learjet that was transporting those folks up in Philadelphia that just slammed into the ground. Then you recently
Right.
had, what was it, a day or two ago, the small plane in Alaska that disappeared, and then they found that. Uh,
Yeah.
so I mean, in aviation, there's a lot of maintenance issues too. I mean, it could be maintenance issues, or it could be, latent defects. John would say it would take 8 to 10 years typically for a defect to manifest itself. And he,
Eight
that,
to 10 years.
yeah.
Wow.
So you got planes now that are in that time period that could
Mm.
be manifesting issues. So,
Is that because they're not keeping up with the maintenance? So over just 8 to 10 years, the mechanical issues start to worsen.
I think it would probably be more like a latent concealed defect.
Okay.
I mean, I'm speculating, but I mean, that's kind of what John was talking about.
Right.
And like Sam Mohawk, our other client, who's a current employee at Boeing and on the 737 Max program, right?
Mm-hmm.
He and John both coincidentally complained about all these lost non-conforming parts. They talk about it, or they call it non-conforming part. Could be a part that was dinged up when the mechanic was trying to install it, and then they have to take it off and then get an engineering disposition on what can I use this? Do I need to modify it somehow to be able to use it? And or it could be a totally just defective, rejected part.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and there were Sam Mohawk talks about thousands of lost non-conforming parts. Non, you certainly don't want a non-conforming part on an aircraft. And John and Sam both talk about the lack of traceability of these parts. Like, where are they? I mean, this isn't a 7-Eleven where you can walk in and just buy parts. So if you have all these plane parts missing, they're not in the warehouse. They're not where they're supposed to be. Kept segregated off in an area that they have actually kind of like fenced off, so people can't just come in and just take parts. But unfortunately, that was one thing John complained about, was that people would just come in there and use it like as a parts store. If they didn't have a new part, they would just come and take a non-conforming part and go put it on an airplane. And I mean, if you're not documenting it properly, depending on what kind of part it is, I mean, that could be a really critical thing. And of course, it could,
Yeah.
it could cause all kinds of things.
Well, I'm just imagining, I don't know if this is totally apples to apples, but imagine if surgeons did that or doctors just took, random like parts and put them into our bodies. Like, that would be insane.
Hmm.
Your body wouldn't be able to function if it were just random and not, you weren't totally tracing where it was coming from.
Yeah, certainly a big deal, I think. And
Yeah. What is the most egregious example of that John or you have seen of a non-conforming part?
it's a good question. Let me think about that for a second. Listen, it's not only that. I also will mention that what I'm talking about here is public record. Like John Barnett's deposition transcript's been publicly released in a redacted form, albeit, and his complaint's been released. So I mean, another issue he was complaining about that really concerned him. I mean, it concerned him up until his passing, was that they would put. Okay, so you got the flooring that everybody walks on, right, when you enter the plane, and it's the seats sit on. And so there are like 20,000 of these E-nuts, it's called. And these are the bolts that bolt the flooring down. And when they were torquing the bolts, it was creating a sliver, a titanium sliver, to come off underneath. And guess what's underneath? The wiring harnesses. The 787 is a fly-by-wire plane, right? So this is everything controlling the plane. And he was saying that there were thousands of these shards coming down and some falling into the wiring bundles. And then there's also electronic bays, E-bays they call them, where they're electronic equipment. If it falls in one of there, it could take a plane down. And of course, over time, I'm not an aviation mechanic or engineer or anything. This is just kind of common sense. But you certainly don't want to have sharp slivers of metal sitting on top of wires that are controlling a plane carrying 300 people. I mean, over time, it could, as the bundles move, it's not like those could easily cause an electrical short, cause a fire.
Right.
That was a really concerning point. And John had filed a complaint with the FAA about that as well.
Is that because back to the non-conforming parts, were the E-nuts, is that what they were called, the bolts? Were they not appropriately installed, or were they, why was that leading to shards of them making contact with the wiring?
I'm not sure. That would be speculation on my part at this time.
Yeah, yeah.
Like in John's deposition, he talked about a quality manager that he worked with. It was actually above him. Came and took a non-conforming oxygen tube